So a rather out-of-place video for me on this channel, but actually when we begin to discuss this, you'll see that it's not. It's actually in line with what we typically discuss on this channel. And ultimately we will be discussing through this video the idea of psychological warfare, mind war. And I made a community post very recently on a game that just came out called Dragon Age the Veilguard. Now, I have been a long time Dragon Age fan, and all the way back to Dragon Age Origins in 2008. So I've played them all. In fact, Dragon Age Origins I've played, thinking back now, it's probably half a dozen origin stories. I've played through them all. So I've replayed the game at least 6 times. It was a superb game, very gritty. The characters are pretty well done. They're well fleshed out. There's enough contrast and character development to make it dramatic, to make it interesting and engaging to the player. I quite enjoyed the tactical combat aspect of it as well. The graphics at the time, I thought were quite visceral, and again they added to that grittiness of it, that dark fantasy setting. Now, fast forward to the Veilguard. Now, I have bought the game. I've played an hour of it. I'll probably refund it. It is absolutely bland, banal. It's inauthentic as well. The dialogue sounds as though it has been, I've seen this criticism, written by AI. That's what it feels like when you engage with characters and such. And it is very true. It's almost very huskified. It lacks any soul. And again, that couples quite nicely with the inauthentic and almost cartoonish caricatures of the character models, the avatars. It's atrocious, honestly. Like most of these games that have essentially BlackRock's own brand of ESG policy emplaced within it, you are left feeling like you're watching a digital ritualistic humiliation of these, beloved franchises that you grew up with. I mean, of course, this is weaponized. We're going to get to this later on in the video. This is totally weaponized. But I've heard criticism as well. It's almost like you've got a few member berries. Essentially what that is a colloquial phrase to describe nostalgia bait. For example, let's look at the Disney Star Wars remake. They brought back all the old characters. Star Wars, if you will, was still wearing the mutilated face of the old Star Wars, but behind that mutilated face, that mask, if you will, was something altogether entirely different. Something that was very much antithetical to the old Star Wars, diametrically opposed to it. It's the same with this. So essentially it's playing it, it's almost like an HR meeting with member berries sprinkled in to try and fool you into believing you're playing a Dragon Age game, which of course you're not. That becomes painfully obvious. I would say an hour in, probably less. You can feel it. The dialogue itself takes a sharp detour from what you're used to. The combat is better than I expected, but it's not. It's something that it wears thin. It is not something that engages you throughout the entire game, and a lot of the dialogue you're skipping through just because it is so utterly boring. It's totally unengaging. It's just not very entertaining. And then you have the elements of what feels to me like some sort of religious sermon from the prophets of secularism, postmodernism, and I guess you would call it wokeism. And to me, it just feels like you're being lectured. You also have top surgery scars in the character creator. It almost feels as though throughout parts of the game, like that, they're using the game as a vehicle of propaganda, and it feels as though the world of Thedas, this is where the Dragon Age universe is set, this continent of Thedas, it almost feels as though it has been hollowed out to act as a mere digital and multimedia vessel for this type of social engineering and overtly political propaganda. And it leaves a very uneasy taste in one's mouth. And it embitters myself, because I'm a long-time fan of the series, and almost feels as though they've just simply destroyed that fantasy setting. So it almost feels as though you're not really playing a Dragon Age game. And that alienation is truly off-putting all the way throughout it. As soon as you start, actually, from the character, as I stated, from the character customization screen, it hits you. I mean, I could put up with that because, of course, with RPG games, you want to permit the broadest level of role-playing. Now, don't get me wrong, I think this is meant to be set, from what I could pick up from the lore of this game, and I say simply this game because in particular, there's innumerable instances where it seems to break the lore, the established lore of previous installments within the IP, the series. So, again, it was very off-putting. Like a lot of modern games, and I've stopped, by and large, I've stopped playing modern games. I actually played this one just because I wanted to see the train wreck. I wanted to see how bad it was. I was hearing how bad it actually was. But there was, again, because it's quite divisive, what we're seeing in terms of the reviews, there's a lot of reviews that have been clearly paid for within the mainstream gaming journalist circles and publications. There's a few that have given it glowing 100 out of 100 scores, 10 out of 10 scores, clearly bought and paid for. Or simply, that score that they provide them is simply based on, again, because the political propaganda therein aligns with their political, specific political ideological bent. So you have that angle to it. However, ultimately, what these publications are doing, the ones that are bought and paid for to provide these glowing reviews, is that they're essentially lying about this game. And it's not subjective. What I'm stating to you is not a subjective opinion. I have played countless games. I mean, even the original Dragon Age Origins, Dragon Age 2, Dragon Age Inquisition, they were all clearly, all of BioWare's games, the Mass Effect games, all of that, all of them are clearly, without a shadow of a doubt, progressive and liberal, which I didn't mind playing it. Fallout New Vegas was the first Fallout game, I believe, to introduce same-sex relationships as an option. Also, other such instances of liberal, what you would call liberal social behaviour, was found throughout that game. In fact, there's a liberal bent to all games. There's a liberal lens that all of these stories within video games are projected through. I don't necessarily have a problem with that, right? I understand those who ostensibly self-style as artists, they will always have that sort of liberality about them. I mean, that's just something that's part of who they are as individuals, part of who they are as artists, right? Even when art was a reflection of nature and a reflection of the beauty of nature, they were still of that sort of progressive, liberalist mindset. It has always been the case. It's just the way artists seem to function. They function in terms of how they view themselves as individuals, right? Their art is a form of self-actualization within the hierarchy of needs. So you will always gravitate towards liberality because that is the path of least resistance. But what we're discussing here is beyond liberality. In fact, it's anti-liberal, I would say. It almost takes on the form of the Ouroboros, where because of the divisiveness of this, because of the way that all of these issues are sort of, it feels like they're railroaded into these games. I mean, Dragon Age as an IP has never dealt so overtly and directly with these very novel socio-political issues, what we would broadly define as wokeism. And again, it just totally destroys the experience. It destroys any immersion that you may have within the world, any immersion that you may experience in terms of the arc of the characters and the story arc. I mean, all of that it just dissipates upon contact with what feels like a very caustic social ideology, or anti-social ideology, depending upon your opinion of it. So I wrote in my community post, these games are designed to demoralize. It is a subdivision of Psywar called Mind War. In essence, it is the equivalent of the Soviet tactic of demoralization by immersing the culture in a new radical milieu that undermines every value and foundational pillar of the initial culture or civilization. The plan is not to persuade you, but to gradually destroy your very will to preserve your cultural and civilizational identity, to defeat the enemy, you, by convincing him or you that you have already lost, ultimately. That is mind war. That is demoralization. So, ultimately, they don't really care if people buy this game or not, right? They don't care. It doesn't matter. You have individuals on, I guess you could call it the right, or the ones who oppose this, because not everyone is right-wing who opposes this, that we can vote with our dollars. That's the idea that they constantly espouse. We cannot. BlackRock owns all of these companies. All of these games that are pushed, promoted, and developed, it doesn't matter about the consumer or if anyone buys it. It's merely about, like a graffiti artist or vandal, it's about brand and brand acknowledgement. Simply about tagging spots, if you will. Like a dog demarcates and marks its territory by its piss stains. That is exactly what BlackRock seeks to do with all of these various ESG-driven projects. Dragon Age Veilguard is one of them, of course. And of course, this is done through consultancy groups like Sweet Baby Inc. If you've not heard of them, they are essentially an extreme or extremist a consultancy group which attempts to force, and by the admission of their CEO, terrify companies into inputting into games this type of political ideology. What is the reason for this? Why? What is the reason? Well, the primary reason is, like what we see with Dragon Age Veilguard, they have, as I mentioned, turned the characters and avatars, the character models, if you will, they've turned them into, somebody said, Pixar-looking characters, which is, I mean, I can concur with that, but it's extremely caricature-like. It's something that's more accessible or more interfaceable, compatible with the mind of a child, which of course, unfortunately, a lot of adults have become nowadays, with the dumbing down process through education, media, and of course, short-form content and doom scrolling within social media. But the dialogue as well is very... That's another thing about the game, the dialogue and the models, they're very inoffensive. They don't challenge the viewer. They don't provide any anxiety to the viewer. They're very innocuous, which is of course why the whole experience is forgettable and rather boring. There was a lot of points throughout the story where I was rolling my eyes at how utterly inane and backwards the dialogue was. And the dialogue seemed to have no bearing, have no weight, no purpose in some instances. Just total boring chit-chat. Again, inanity. And yeah, that's another thing. It is an RPG game, but the problem is you have to... Whenever we have a non-binary character, or any character who is quote-quote gender diverse, if you will, you can only support them when because you're given certain options for dialogue to reply to them as a character, as a player. You cannot reply, no matter how evil a character you're role-playing as, you can't reply in a way that is unsupportive of their gender diversity. So there's no choice there. So you're sort of, again, railroaded. It's a very subtle and subversive tactic to normalize within one's mind this type of very divisive and polarizing and radical social ideology. And furthermore as well, to actually get the full, complete, and I guess good ending of the game, you have to go through certain companion quests, which, by the way, the pacing of these companion quests are terrible, but you have to go through these companion quests, which see you in one instance affirming and aiding a gender diverse character in, I guess, their transition. Now, again, this is the problem. If we are desirous of inclusivity, I'm going to get to another instance of why this game seemed non-inclusive. If we want to be inclusive, then we have to include that which is also of the other extreme. So, again, if we're talking about diversity and the idea of spectrums, which is very much, that very much is entailed in the concept of diversity, this idea of spectrums, then spectrums themselves have extremes, which, you know, funnily enough, is a sort of binary, but they have polarities, they have extremes of the spectrum. And again, it just seems as though perhaps it's because they desire to be inoffensive. They want to simply just cater, or one could call it pandering, to a certain demographic, a certain political or ideological creed. Which is fine. I mean, there, as a company, they can do that. But what we seem to be seeing throughout the entire pop culture landscape, whatever it may be, the entertainment landscape, is that these various companies are controlled by an oligopolic cartel. by asset managing corporations that have a disproportionate control over not just social policy but political policy, through controlling politicians, through lobbying, through controlling directly these companies and corporations which seem to act as political wings, political arms of this, what seems to be a very idiosyncratic ideology, which is, ironically, the point that we find ourselves civilizationally and demographically. It is not necessarily the most socially sustainable. These types of ideologies seem to promote, like what we see with the transformative surgeries, so to say, they seem to delete, to be quite tame about it, they seem to delete those parts on the body which are integral to producing the next generation. So, pardon me, the culture itself is not even sustainable. This radical, novel, cultural and social ideology, it's not even sustainable itself. Out with a generation. I mean, what they're promoting is totally barren in terms of fertility and in terms of its cultural longevity and its generational longevity. It's almost as if they are sterilizing the individual through control and manipulation of their mind, which forces them or corrals them, coerces them really, into these transformative surgeries which I mentioned delete their sexual organs or completely impair their development. And again, as I've mentioned, the art style and the dialogue style, the writing style of this game seems to be actually geared towards children, right? Which of course we can mention that the majority of adults now are actually perpetual adolescents. Let's not, beat around the bush, so to say. They are children. They have childlike minds. Western civilization is devolving into an idiocracy, and it's just blatant to see. I mean, even the divisiveness with this game, you see it. It actually seems to be split along the middle, and I think the people on the left are merely sort of jumping on the bandwagon. They're, piling on, trying to provide momentum and defending this game, because there has been so many, I guess you would call them, go woke, go broke flops throughout the entertainment industry. Not just, of course, the video game industry. It's not merely just specific to that. It's throughout. Movies, comic books, of course. There's a major drop-off in consuming of entertainment. And a lot of these games just die upon impact, right? As soon as they're released, I mean, it's essentially a race to the bottom for them in terms of their player retention and their player drop-off rates. For example, I mean, we see with Veilguard, if we look at the Steam charts, it's taken a major nosedive just from its release. So its all-time peak, which was 17 hours ago, and this is its all-time 24-hour peak, was 70,414. I mean, this game is totally cooked. It is gone. It's over for it. What you've got to remember as well, the development cycle of this game was about 10 years, and there was multiple iterations of it, and this is what they've settled on. It feels as though they just wanted it finished and out. Like EA wasn't giving up any more funding to them, so they needed to just, just send it onto the market, see what happens. How many hundreds of millions was expended on the production of this game? An innumerable amount of money was wasted on this game's development, and all they have in the first day is between 70 and 80k concurrent players. The issue is we're seeing as well is that we're hearing reports of a huge number of refunds, 24-hour refunds of this game, which of course will skew the Steam charts too. So what you're seeing with the 70 to 80,000, again, we can even discount that number further, reducing it down further, when we look at the achievements of individuals, and how many of those players, those 70,000, have completed the introductory mission, the first mission. I forget the number now, but it's quite low. So that tells you a lot of these quote-quote players come from bot land. They're bots. Or the figures are being skewed or inflated in an artificial and deceptive manner. So you're talking about perhaps, at the most, 60,000, most likely 50,000 players. For a game that took 10 years to develop, probably hundreds of millions that they just dumped into the black hole of its development that they'll never see again. It's a flop. But we'll get into why the primary business case for this game wasn't actually business at all. It was activism. It is to ensure social engineering. All of these games that are being funded by BlackRock and such are to promote ESG ideals, the precepts that BlackRock holds to. But of course BlackRock holds to them because they desire an artificial collapse of Western civilization, and this is a route by which they can ensure that and bring that reality, that desire rather, to fruition. This is not a Dragon Age game. It's essentially they've taken Dragon Age, mutilated it, hollowed it out in some sort of deranged necromantic ritual. That's the only way I can describe it. It's just so bad. It's so bad. Yeah, they've hijacked the IP and used it as a political vehicle for this ideology. I can't believe it. I mean, you live long enough to just see every single IP, every series be used by radicals who are employed, ironically, by establishment figures, a sort of deep state, a financier class, to destroy, to actively demolish anything of beauty, because that is what holds up. It's a foundational pillar that holds up the culture, and the culture itself holds up the civilization. So anything of beauty must be turned ugly. You see that in the architecture, art, because beauty is order. Beauty is the equivalent. It's the visual and tangible equivalent, perceivable equivalent of order. And the only way to destroy order, to lead to disorder, to lead to chaos, which is what the radical desires, it's the currency of the radical, then they must therefore destroy beauty. They must uglify everything. The uglification of absolutely everything. And they hollow everything out. This does not feel like it was created by a human being. It feels like it was created by an utter husk, a grey man, a bland and banal automaton, an algorithm, honestly. But then again, that perhaps is an insult to algorithms. All of the dialogue, this isn't down to incompetence. This has all been selected in a very nefarious and intentional way to demoralize the player. This is psychological warfare, make no qualms about it. It is to demoralize the player. You play this game, and of course, this is one of many games that are like this throughout the AAA scene and the AAA offerings from video game publishers. And of course, you find it concurrently throughout every single industry, every institution, every facet of society. Again, this uglification, this challenge of the radical at every turn. You just can't have something that's innocuous, that's innocent, that just is for its own merits, right? The political ideology must be railroaded into everything. And unfortunately, it is absolutely jarring to me as a player. It's jarring to me as a human being. It's jarring to me as a citizen of what I guess you would call it Western civilization, if we were to ascribe a broad descriptor to it. It's I don't know what else to say. It's just extremely tragic. It's sad to see something I grew up with, a franchise that I loved, just be tarnished and subjected to a sacrilegious mutilation, a sparagmos, a Bacchic frenzy that has tore apart every limb, every digit upon every hand, and has decapitated it, has sucked the soul from it. I mean, everything you come across now in this cultural wasteland that we call Western civilization is barren of any artistic quality, any higher inclination to something of a grander and more elegant or exquisite nature. It is complete, I mean, it's very sterile. It's a clinical environment. It's an environment that almost feels as though they're paving the way for a rule by algorithm, an algocracy. I mean, even the people themselves are becoming, the population, the younger generation, they're becoming, of course, dopamine addicts, which through this benumbing of the dopamine centers is robbed them of any desire to, or any higher inclination towards innovation, challenging themselves creatively or through perhaps, I don't know, engineering or artistic pursuits or anything of that quality, that pursuit. You're reaching a point where these complex systems throughout Western civilization eventually are just going to collapse. I mean, you're seeing it. The video game industry is a microcosm of what is happening in the wider society. And these complex systems within complex systems can't survive this type of lack of innovation, this robbing of the population of any quality that makes them stand out, that would lead them to pursue innovative pathways, that would lead them to pursue higher ideals and things of that nature. It's quite worrying, actually. It's quite worrying. But as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, this would tie in with a lot of what we discuss upon this channel, and of course this ties into managerialism. All of this is very inoffensive, and I think the idiots believe that, of course, middle management who are isolated, they live in echo chambers, and this type of infectious social ideology, which is, you know, by its very nature, very extreme and polarizing and isolating. I mean, if you hold to these ideas, the majority of individuals in society do not agree with you. So therefore, it is naturally divisive, which is what we see with a lot of the reviews of Dragon Age the Veilguard, and a lot of the replies within the forums. That's another thing I was meant to mention. The inclusivity factor. Nothing screams quality within a game, quite like denying review codes to persons of interest, game reviewers, of course the alternative video game media, because they perhaps will be critical of your game, or they've already espoused a critical sentiment towards the trailers and such. Moreover as well, we see that BioWare seems to be, and it's just recent reports that have come out which seem to indicate that they may be bribing or providing gifts to game journalists and streamers to thus ensure that they provide them positive feedback on the game, so that they can, again, fool more people into buying this game. But I want to mention that it is clear to me that both the progressive and, I guess you would call it, anti-woke mob, they're all of this division, all of this energy that is being produced, it is to fuel the distractionism that we see prevalent in these types of media. That protects the establishment. Like voting, it permits a social vent for potential social angst. That is why they've chosen ideologies that, of course, tick multiple boxes, depopulation for one, but the second box is that it creates social disarray and social disorder. So, in that way, they can pit the peasants against themselves, pit the proletariat against themselves, to ensure that the crypto oligarchy, which is increasingly becoming clear and very transparent to everyone, as transparent as Teflon, and it keeps them safe. It protects their position of power. Again, if the peasants are distracted with infighting, then why would they, and they're dispensing of that energy and angst amongst them, fighting amongst themselves, then why would they unite and direct that energy, that angst, that anger and fury and hatred to the would-be tyrant kings, right? The crypto oligarchy, the corporations, BlackRock, all of this. So this is why BlackRock, they have these social capital scores in terms of, you know, if you are socially and politically aligned with ESG or DEI, diversity, equity and inclusion, ESG, equity, social governance, I believe. So why, if BlackRock assigns a score to you as a company, as a corporation, depending, and they of course assign investment and capital to you if you align with these political and social ideals, right? So that's why they no longer need consumers. It doesn't matter if you buy this or do not buy it. Of course, this isn't going to make its money back. This was 10 years in the making. Imagine all of that capital expenditure. And it takes about 6 months to a year to recoup, to break even upon any game. And that's when gaming was far more popular, and each iteration of an IP, and of course upon a new IP, it was typically well received and you didn't have this sort of divisiveness surrounding it. Of course, they're not making money off this from the consumer. This is to, again, ensure a cultural impact which can fuel the division amongst these ideological camps, the woke and the anti-woke, the right and the left, so on and so forth, to thus permit distractionism and to further accelerate the artificial collapse of Western civilization. That's it. That is the twofold primary reasons That is the twofold strategy of BlackRock when they invest in these types of titles, these games. And they, again, just entirely hijack and remake these IPs into digital vehicles of political propaganda, because they're looking for a reaction. That is what it's designed for. This isn't designed to sell well, and the game design present within this game does not lend credence to the hypothesis that it was designed pursuant to the desire to sell or to push game units to people, to consumers. It is clear by the game design that the primary objective, the focus of the game design, was to promote ESG and was to promote division and to create essentially an intentionally bad product, right? Because the product itself isn't, it's not necessarily something that was created with the consumer in mind, or even created with quality in mind. It was designed to be a battleground, an ideological battleground, a place to contain this and to accelerate, to accentuate and galvanize that ideological squabbling. That's the reason for it. This is, like everything now, psychological warfare. It's psi-war. Mind war.
Holding that snake's nose, she's still holding the ruby in her other hand. Maker's panties, I was so proud.
Oh,
Ah, shit. They're still holding it, sorry.
What are you doing?
Pulling a barb.
Oh, okay.
a barv?
Tradition in the Lords of Fortune, from one of our old members, Barv. Good guy, but like most of us, his plans went sideways a lot. Bad blood among your crew's not good for morale, but there's not always time for big, drawn-out apologies. So, when one of us screws up and we know we've screwed up, we do a quick 10 to put it right. Pulling a Barv. Oh, there we go.
I'm glad the Lords of Fortune have Tarsh's back.
Oh, Tarsh isn't the first non-binary member of the Lords.
Really?
It was a little before your time, but Horlicks was one of ours.
Huh.
Bastard looked better than I did in a dress or pants. And out of them, too.
Any reason you can't just apologise?
Sometimes people say, oops, sorry, and hope that fixes it. But they just want to get the whole thing over with. Trust me, I know. But pulling a bath, you sweat a little. Makes you think about it a little more. Shows the other person you mean it.
What if they mean it when they say they're sorry, though?
And that's the other reason. Some people mess up and get all dramatic. They make it about them. Oh, you know, I didn't mean it right. I'd never do that on purpose. They feel so bad about it that it's on everyone else to smooth it over and make them feel better.
Oh, okay, yes, some people might do that.
Pulling a barv puts it on the person who screwed up. They made the...
You.
I am at peace, Avatash. I have the clouds to watch and fish to eat.
More than just fish. Here you go. Shathan said to eat the fruit before it spoils.
I like the cookies better.
Everyone likes the cookies better.
I'll eat the fruit. Thank you, Avatash.
Panahe done. I'll see you soon.